What up, guys? Welcome to the Son of Wanda Bad Batch Season 3, Episode 5 has dropped, so let's conversationalize. Alright, guys, so Bad Batch Season 3, Episode 5 is here. And I was not overly fond of the last episode, mainly because I thought that it was like 95 or 99% filler. Like, the ending was great. You know, it set up, you know, some conflict that was really nice, but everything before that just felt almost entirely pointless. So you get to this one, and I am done with filler. Like, I don't want any more filler. I've established that. If you've seen my previous videos, no more filler. And I'm conflicted.
Conflict zone ahead.
Because I think that the actual, what they tackled in this episode wasn't filler. It was good. It needed to be tackled. It moved the plot forward in that regard. What was actually taking place in the actual mission felt very filler. It felt like things just kind of happen in order to cause relationships, character relationships to escalate and progress. And so I am getting into spoilers now, so be warned. But the episode starts off with the Bad Batch on Pabu, the peaceful planet that was featured in the last season. That was kind of, you know, like supposed to be a safe haven for the Bad Batch that they could, you know, hide from the Empire. The Empire would never look for them there. That kind of thing. And they've taken Crosshair to Pabu. They've taken Omega to Pabu. And it's basically the Bad Batch kind of going back to normal, sort of, getting their life back, sort of. Echo has arrived, and they're trying to work out how to find Tantus so they can rescue the clones that are still captured on Mount Tantus. And throughout all of this, it's established, obviously, that, you know, the last episode ended with Crosshair reuniting with Hunter and Wrecker, and we were, you know, excited to see exactly how that was going to play out, like were they going to butt heads. Were they going to make up? And basically, both of those things happened in this episode. Wrecker, you know, he kind of, his, like, his whole, like, childlike innocence is kind of, is emphasized in this episode in the sense of, like, he recognizes that Omega trusts Crosshair, so he trusts Crosshair. Like, that's good enough for him. What's funny about that is that he had such a stern, mean face when he was looking at Crosshair at the end of the last episode, and then you start this one, and he's perfectly fine with it. So, that's interesting. But Hunter is the one who's more, like, you know, he's way more skeptical. He's way more on the fence about it. He's way more like, well, like, should we have even given him back his rifle? Because Crosshair's, like, kind of practicing with his rifle, seeing how good his aim is, because his hands have been shaking. And we don't really know what the hand shaking is or where it came from, but he's still having a pretty big issue with it, and it's affecting his aim. But, you know, Hunter's, you know, conflicted about that, and, you know, Crosshair recognizes that Hunter still doesn't trust him, and, you know, he's still kind of mean and gruff, so he's, like, just whatever about it. But they end up having to go back to this snow ice planet with the ice vultures that Crosshair visited in the last season, where he mainly, the main episode where he betrayed the Empire, shot an Imperial officer who was just absolutely the worst character to possibly exist in Star Wars. He was just so terrible, and Crosshair shot him, and it was awesome. And it was, you know, it was signifying him betraying the Empire because of how horrible the Empire was to him, especially. And so I loved that episode in the last season so much. It was probably the best episode of this series, if I'm being honest. And so we go back to that planet, and you can tell the whole time, like, Crosshair walks out of the ship and he sees these ice vultures, and he's like, well, you can tell it's all kind of coming back to him. He hasn't really told the Batch the whole story about the planet and what he experienced there and how his clone friend Mayday died because of the Empire's lack of caring about clone lives at all. And so you can tell the whole time in his head he's kind of reconciling with that in his mind and remembering his past trauma there. And what's awesome about it is that Wrecker gives him his old Bad Batch suit back. So you get to see him back in his normal Crosshair Bad Batch outfit. And it is really awesome to see him work alongside the Bad Batch just like before, because we basically started this series off with Crosshair's betrayal. So in the series called The Bad Batch, we still haven't really gotten the full Bad Batch because Crosshair's spent by far the majority of this series with the Empire. Almost all of it. So it's great to see him with the Bad Batch, just like in Clone Wars Season 7, fighting alongside them. And, you know, this episode, I think the best thing that this episode does is really just kind of hammer home his redemption. Shows how his perspective has changed, as well as, you know, it's kind of in the process of the mission. These events, as they play out, kind of change Hunter's perspective. Because they were brothers, you know, the Bad Batch, they were basically a family. And for Crosshair to betray them the way he did, obviously is going to create some pretty big rifts between them. But they go to the planet in the first place because they're trying to get more intel from an Imperial base, the Imperial base that Crosshair was at in the last season. And they're trying to get more information from this base in order to find more out about Tantus. And they see these like transponder sort of like signal things on the outskirts of the base surrounding it, and they realize that, oh, well, those are taking up too much power. We need to get more power to the base so we can find out more intel. They do that. They take away the power from the transponders, and then after that, there's this ominous feel. And you can tell that something is coming because they turn those transponders off. And amidst all this, we just get some more conflict between Crosshair and Hunter. Hunter just knows that Crosshair is not telling them everything about what happened at that base. And he wants to know, because he really, mainly what it comes down to is Hunter wants to know what was the thing that made Crosshair betray the Empire just like he betrayed the Bad Batch. And Crosshair eventually does admit that he killed an Imperial officer because the Empire betrayed him, which is the very, very, very short version, but yes, that is basically what happened. And Crosshair then thinks that Hunter's just mad because Crosshair was the one who ended up saving Omega and not Hunter. And so obviously, you know, the tensions rise, and that's the main meat of the episode, is Crosshair and Hunter's relationship and how it's mended, how it's worked through. And of course, just like every other Star Wars thing in existence, a giant monster comes out of the ice, and like a worm monster creature that can burrow through snow and ice, kind of like Dune, the sandworms in Dune. There's been a lot of creatures like that in Star Wars as well, but it comes out of the ice and it starts attacking them because the transponders were turned off, and apparently those were not only keeping out raiders, which is what we thought the purpose was. They were also keeping out these massive creatures. Now, my question is, how come we didn't see that creature or any kind of those creatures in the episode from the last season where Crosshair was there with Mayday? I don't really understand how we didn't see those, because I'm pretty sure they went outside the zone of the transponders, so you figured they'd see them, but I don't know. I guess it just didn't happen. But anyway, creature comes out, and I feel like there's always a creature that attacks or something when some character growth is happening, or they're dealing with something like some character tensions and all that. And then a creature shows up. And honestly, kind of what made the episode for me was one line. And it was Wrecker, when they realized that they have to turn the transponders back on in order to get rid of the creature. It was Wrecker. He runs over to this other part of the base to try and bring back power so they can turn the transponders on, help turn the transponders on. He says to himself as he's running, "Why is there always a giant monster?" And honestly, it was that one line of dialogue that made me go, okay, at least the writers are self-aware. At least they know how many times this has happened, how many times it keeps happening. At the same time, I will say, I don't know if it necessarily makes it... I'm conflicted, like I said at the beginning of this video. Because it still feels lazy at this point when this is literally the 58th time. It's like you need some kind of conflict in an episode, and you either have to go back and forth between Empire, creature, Empire, creature, Empire, creature. And when this is like the 1500th time it's happened, it just starts to get old. And it gets predictable as well, and that is the issue. But the fact that Wrecker actually admits it does make it, I guess, a little bit better. But in short, they end up turning their transponders on. leading the giant worm creature, whatever monster, ice monster, away from the transponders to where they can get back into the zone of the transponders, and the transponders are keeping the giant creature out, away. So that conflict is resolved, and they get the intel they needed from the Imperial base. And I suppose one standout moment for me was a moment that had absolutely no dialogue, and it's before the worm creature attacks and all that, and before even Crosshair and Hunter have their argument. Crosshair goes to this specific part, like this room inside the base, and he sees a bunch of these clone helmets, and one of them is Mayday's, his clone friend who died. And he just has this very solemn moment where he puts these clone helmets just on the top of this box. Like, they're all kind of in this pile on the floor, and he, like, grabs each one and puts them on the top of this box and lines them up. And I think it's just his way of honoring those clones that he did actually care about, and that he knew they were his brothers. And what I think is very interesting about the Bad Batch is, I remember in Clone Wars Season 7, there was, like, it was established quite a bit that there was this divide between the Bad Batch and what they called the regs, like the regular clones. And, they didn't like the regular clones all that much because they had their own way of doing things. The Bad Batch were different. They were genetically kind of mutated, sort of, and had their differences and stuff. But you can tell that after the Empire took over and started just treating the clones absolutely horribly and just using them to get what they wanted, it stopped being about, we're these mutated clones and you're the regs and we have to be on this side and you have to be on this side. It stopped being about that, and they started to kind of, like, the lines just started to be blurred. And it didn't matter whether you were a reg or a mutated clone or whatever, you were a clone and you were brothers. And I feel like that's what they've established in this episode, especially with that moment. And I really enjoy that. I really think that is good writing. That is good progression to where, before there was this divide and now there's, like, no separation because they're all united on the cause of the Empire really stinks and they're treating all clones, no matter what they are, horribly. And so this moment where Crosshair puts the helmets back on top of the boxes, no dialogue, the simplest scene you could think of, I think is the most powerful moment in the episode. And just says a lot about where the place that Crosshair's at, where he's just kind of, I feel like this is kind of this sense of closure for him, because that is where his full betrayal of the Empire took place. That is where he fully realized how evil they were. And him returning to this place and kind of having that moment of closure by honoring Mayday and all the clones that were there and were being used by the Empire. It's an important moment for him, for sure, as a character. But, all the worm stuff happens, everything gets resolved, and they get the intel they need. And at the end of the episode, Crosshair finally admits to Hunter that he has made mistakes. And it's this moment of Crosshair letting go of his pride and, accepting, the fact that, yeah, I have done things that I am not proud of. And Hunter, he basically just says, like, we all have things that we regret. It's kind of the classic lesson, it's like it's the Spider-Man lesson. It's all these different kind of things where it's like you've done something bad and you can either just wallow in self-pity and feel guilty about it, or you can suck it up and just be like, you know what? I made a mistake. I did something very wrong, but it doesn't mean I have to stay in this state of depression or despair, and I can continue on with the lessons that I've learned, make a better life for myself, and make better choices. And so I like, the full redemption arc that we have for Crosshair, and I like that we get to have, hopefully, the majority of this season, the next 10 episodes, to spend with Crosshair with the Bad Batch and not against them. So that is what what this episode was all about, is Crosshair's full redemption and his mending of his relationship with the Bad Batch, mainly Hunter, because none of the other Bad Batch seem to really have a problem with it. Like, Echo says one line, I think, but he's kind of the peacemaker between the two of them for most of the episode. He's just like, hey, they didn't kill each other, that's a plus. So, Echo doesn't really seem to care, and Wrecker's all right with it because Omega's all right with it. So, that is the main meat of this episode. And so, yeah, that's what I'm saying with, like, the whole filler thing. It's like, we definitely accomplished some stuff with Crosshair. We established what we needed to establish with him. We had some very poignant and appropriate moments with his character. Good character progression, but at the same time, the actual, like, the worm attacking and them needing to go to this random base feels very, similar to the thousands of things we've seen before. It starts to get predictable, and it has that filler vibe to it of, like, we have this one side thing that we need to do, and look, there's something that, prolongs the situation. Look, there's some kind of fork in the road, whether it be a, natural disaster or a giant monster or the Empire comes back. It's always the same kind of thing that serves the same purpose for the story. It's like getting the Bad Batch where they need to be, either as characters or actually, like, in the Star Wars universe, like, literally getting them to where they need to be. So I do get tired of that. I hope we can change it up more for the rest of the season. But I did like that all the stuff that this episode did for Crosshair. I really enjoyed that, and I'm excited to see what they have next, what they have planned next for his character. But that is my review of Bad Batch Season 3, Episode 5. Let me know what you guys thought about it down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Have a very blessed day. May the Lord be with you. May the Force be with you. Goodbye. And that's a wrap.